Christine Dolan.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you, Sue and Les, and my dear friends Michelle and Larry. And so that sets the tone. I produced that film in 2016, and nothing's changed. I was commissioned by something called a group called the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which is the grandfather of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children that Adam Walsh facilitated back in the early 80s. So I was commissioned in 2000 to investigate the exploitation of children emanating from the Balkan crisis that I had investigated in the early 90s. So this is 2000, 23 years ago. And in the spring of 2000, the CEO and president, Ernie Allen, called me and said that, did I know anybody that was interested in taking a look at this? And since I had been in the Balkans, I said, I think I would. And I didn't know anything about human trafficking at the time. I am probably where 99.9% of you sitting in this room are right now. I didn't believe. I didn't know. I had no experience. I wasn't a rape victim. Nobody in my family had ever been raped institutionally by the Catholic Church. And I'm going to bring up the Catholic Church today because I'm a Sacred Heart girl and a Jesuit-educated Catholic. So that's what happened in the Catholic Church is what we call institutional trafficking. There's nobody in the world, no federal prosecutor in the world that would take on the Catholic Church for trafficking. But I can assure you it's no different than what happened in the Boys Club, in the Anglican Church, and what happened many, many centuries ago. When people think about human trafficking, they refer to it as modern-day slavery. How many people in this room think that slavery ever ended? Ever ended? Any era? Byzantine? Arabs? Ottoman Empire? America? Then you're doing better than most audiences. Because the truth is it never ended. It just morphed into a different picture. But what we have now is a digital age of slavery. So this is what happened at the very beginning when I did my first investigation. I got off the plane, I'm at Claridge's, I'm jet lagged, I'm having coffee with a guy who's a forensic profiler in London who's explaining to me the difference between pedophilia and ebophilia, and I'm sitting there sipping my coffee and wish it had been a glass of wine at about 11 o'clock in the morning because I had no idea what Jim Shippers was talking about. I had absolutely no idea. And then he said to me, you ought to meet a guy named Paul Holmes. And I said, okay. So he was presented to me as a man, this is June 2000, he was presented to me as a cop, head of Vice, Central London, Charing Cross. And I walked in, and Paul was very personable. And I said to him, Paul, how young are the victims? And he said, infants. And it literally went in one ear, out the other. And about 2 weeks later, I was in Amsterdam, and he recommended that I meet with a Dutch woman who was a cop. Her name was Jola Volebrecht. And I sat down with her on a Sunday evening, took her to dinner, and then she invited a guy named Carlos Shippers, who was one of the best renowned European forensic profilers. And he had a girlfriend with him who was also a profiler who I didn't know at the time. And I was telling them about this great guy I met in London who's telling me that the victims are as young as infants. And I didn't have any context for this. And I said, if this is true, then you have to educate me because I thought I had been around the world, well-educated, well-traveled, covered 3 wars, worked at 4 networks. I thought I kind of knew it all, seen it all. In war zones, we expect to see a lot of evil. It did happen in the Balkans. It's happened in other wars. It goes back in time. It's not a big deal. But it wasn't my ballywick of doing history on it at that point in time. They said, Christine, it's true. And I said, well, if it's true, then you have to really educate me because the mainstream press that I know has absolutely no idea about this. So the next day, Yola called me and she said, you passed the test. I said, what test? She said, we were profiling you. They wanted to find out if I was a tabloid journalist, if I was the real deal. And she said, John Ernst wants to meet you. I said, well, who the hell is he? And she said, take a train down to The Hague. John ran the Hague porn unit, and John brought me in, and we talked for about 2 hours, and he told me just what was happening. And he showed me a room. I couldn't talk about it at the time when I was doing this investigation in 2000, but I can talk about it today. He showed me a room about half the size of this ballroom. And it was a collection of what we call child pornography, and I hate that terminology because it's really crime scene images. There's no such thing as child pornography. But he showed me a room, and it was a collection that a dead Dutch senator had at his foundation. And after he died, somebody on his staff called the cops and said, please collect this. They gave it to the porn unit. Now, think back of 2000. Think back. There's no Facebook. There's no Twitter. Nobody's really paying attention. You're getting emails. But if you're like me, in about 1998, I went on the internet, and about 8 hours later, I realized there was nothing of value on the internet. Correct? Okay? And it's only gotten worse. We know this now, right? But it was very much in its early birth. And what the cops had to do at the time is, just like the internet was a Wild West, it was a new platform, you have to wrap your brain around, and I had to learn this. I had to be trained by law enforcement. That's why I am so pro law enforcement. I had to start thinking, how do these guys think? And I will tell you, I have come to appreciate evil in the sense that they're mercurial. They can know how to pivot. They understand the rules of civilization better than any of us do, even though we think that we're civilized, because they know how to break the law. They know how to not get caught. They know how to think ahead. And they will do anything they can to survive, including killing people. They have no conscience, and everything they do is without a conscience. And in those days, as the internet's being born, there were images that were put on the internet. And from the law enforcement's point of view, they had to figure out, are these recycled images, or are these images of current victims that need to be saved? And that collection that the dead Dutch senator had was considered the Bible and the reference book, because when an image came up, they had to compare it to what was there and had been in his possession for decades. Old images, because they couldn't waste law enforcement revenue, training, manpower to go after a child. And this was considered child pornography. Again, I don't like that word. It's pedocriminality. That's what it is. It's internet pedocriminality. It's pictures of crime scenes. The police had to compare to save it. And then John said to me, he said, "Do you want to see any of this?" And I didn't really know what that meant. I didn't know what that meant. I'm not somebody who looks at pornography. Never have, never been interested in it. I believe in a romance. You know, an old adage, isn't it? So I said, I guess so, if I'm investigating it. And I'm also a professional photographer. And when you're a professional photographer, I don't just photograph animals on African safaris, I photograph people. And I do believe that you can see the soul of somebody through their eyes. And every image that he showed me of children was of terror. And it changed my life. My life changed that day. And as we walked out of the Hague porn unit, Yola said to me, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I need a glass of wine." Because I realized that this was worse than Rwanda. It was worse than a quote-unquote normal war zone, if you can call a war zone normal. It was the depths of hell. Because when you see a child tied up with bamboo, and you see a penis of a man going towards a child's mouth, that was one of the images. And I've written about it in the book. And people have to understand how vile this is when it comes to kids. A lot of men did not understand what I was talking about when I did this first investigation, guys that I worked with at the network. And they said to me, well, Christine, what is it? And I said, okay, tell me about the raunchiest bachelor party you've ever been to. And then I told them about the women that were tortured, the women that were hanging from rafters, women who had 30 clients in one afternoon, men who questioned their sexuality and had disassociation because they were repeatedly raped as a child. The word commodification should be elevated in the global vernacular because this is a shared global shame, and we all own it. We all own it. And I get angry when I hear people say that they believe in the teachings of Jesus or they believe in a higher power, but they ignore this because this has been going on since before Christ. I've gone back and looked at the history. I have documents in the Catholic Church going back to the 3rd and 6th century where they had policies for the pederast in the Catholic Church. And I want to make you uncomfortable tonight. I want you to know that you can ask any question and you will get an answer. We're going to tell you the reality because I want you to walk out of this door and I want you to be more informed than when you came in because law enforcement cannot do this without you. To the grandparents, wake up your children who have kids. To the parents who have young kids, get them off of social media. We've had 2 decades now of nothing but smut, and these guys in Silicon Valley know it. The cops that brought me in on the inside, when they told me that women were rapists, and they were traffickers, and they were on the internet, I said to Sharon Gerling at Scotland Yard, what do they look like? Because the women I know were mama bears, were lioness. It would be beyond our comprehension. No pedophile would be sitting at my table. I don't care how much money Jeffrey Epstein had. Shame on everybody that ever sat at his table, asked him for a job, or ever asked him to get anything. And I say that, and I don't care about politics when it comes to kids. This is a non-political issue. And people should be ashamed when you glorify somebody like an Epstein on this planet. It's horrendous because that is buying into Satan himself. Keep this in mind that when you talk about evil, the opposite of evil spelled backwards is live. And that's what we need to be doing in order to fight this because it is absolutely horrendous what happens to the victims. It is life-changing for them. Many of them are not healed. Friends of mine, and I put together a network for the last 23 years. We know that people have to go through bonding. We know that you shouldn't always be in therapy because you're constantly repeating the question. We know about the forensic, and you hear about this from the state attorney and from Christine, the prosecutor, about this. There's a special way that you actually interview children. And it was started by a guy, I think he was from Alabama or Louisiana. What year was it, Christine? 35 years ago? Late 80s? Okay, so that's what they found out is that when somebody asks about their story, and it's the judge and the prosecutor, and you present it in front of the jury, and you go to the doctor and the shrink and the school and the counselor and mom and dad and grandparents and everybody else, you get re-traumatized as a victim. So they set up these special units where you have a forensic psychologist who's trained on how to question a child with a camera in the room if they're going to use it for prosecutions. Many times it's very difficult for even traumatized victims, and this is for sex, to recount because they suffer from disassociation and just many. I mean, when I started interviewing the victims, I can tell you this in 2000, some of these stories sounded really crazy. Some of them sounded really, really hard. And I remember in August of 2000, I was in Albania, and there was a safe house. And my driver couldn't take me there. I had to be picked up at the hotel. And the woman who was taking care of these victims, and they were from Moldova, Romania, Ukraine, We had a translator, and she said that there was a British reporter that tried to talk to them, and he was a man. And the girls didn't want to open up to him, and I said, well, let's give it a whirl. And, of course, they came in, all 19, 18 of them. They had never shared among themselves. And then I can see the scars on their arms, the attempted suicide. I can see the tears coming down their faces. Somebody started to share. And I said to the woman running it, I said, let's break up in groups. And I spent about 7 or 8 hours with them. And the stories were horrendous. Horrendous. Being hoisted up. This isn't sex. Okay, just understand this. This is torture. It's torture. It's a commodification, it's dehumanization, and sex is only one part of this. Unfortunately, the press, when the story became part of the vernacular, about 2003, 4, and it got into the newspapers and nobody really knew, what this was all about. It wasn't given a historical context, and that's the reason why I'm coming out with this book, because I'm going to take everybody back to the beginning of how I came to believe. Because if the cops hadn't educated me, and if I hadn't said to these kids in Albania, tell me your story and I'll take it to the world, I wouldn't be standing here. That's the honest to God's truth. I had to go into a church, I didn't care what denomination it was, every day after that day at The Hague, and just pray that I knew what the hell I was doing, because I had no idea. I had no idea. But my sense was, when I left The Hague and I went back to Amsterdam, I was supposed to leave for Paris the next day, and I decided I was going to go back down to the red light district in Amsterdam. And I sat there all night until dawn, and I just watched. I watched the guys at the doors. I watched the people in the windows. I watched the people go in meet the girls in the windows. I watched the people go into the sex clubs, live sex clubs. I talked to some of the doormen. I talked to some of the clients. I went in and paid the girls and interviewed them. And I realized just how broken this was, because it was supposed to be normal. And there's nothing normal about it. It's a lot of very, very broken people. But it taught me that I needed to get in deeper. And the cops basically gave me their blessing. Most people don't understand this, but when you do this kind of work, it's very difficult for law enforcement in the U.S. to do investigations in Colombia, to do investigations in Argentina. You have to collaborate. You have to be invited in. And then, you have somebody like Christine Dolan, trained by law enforcement, who's a little bit off her rocker, and I could go into other countries because I didn't have to ask anybody's permission. I was on my own. And I suspected at the time that in the red light districts where there are corners for transvestites, that they were victims of child abuse. And I said, can I take you guys to dinner? And I heard their stories, and I said, I want to hang with you because I want you to be my bodyguard so I can get closer to the trafficking neighborhoods. And they said, well, then you need to go shopping because you're not dressed for this. So that was kind of the fun side of it. But I got to know these guys, and a lot of them, and they passed me on and put me in contact with people in other cities. But a lot of them were from Latin America, Dominican Republic, Venezuela, Costa Rica. And they were all broken. They were victims of child abuse. So when I told them that I was investigating this and I was focusing not on the morality or immorality on it, but on the protection and what this was all about, because I didn't really realize in 2000, at the cusp of the 21st century, that slavery was alive and well. I didn't realize that labor trafficking was there, internet trafficking was about to be born, sex trafficking. Does anybody know what sex trafficking is? That is when you as an American and Australian want to go to the Philippines, Costa Rica, Thailand, Cambodia, and buy a child. And in those days, in 2000, the cybercrime law enforcement would show me on the internet the chat rooms. I'd never been in a chat room, and within a second, the law enforcement official is pretending to be Heidi, 12 or 13 years of age, and then boom, seconds later, hi, hun, how are you? Are you alone? Now that's 2000. So you can imagine now that every child has their own cell phone. Well, when that came on about 2005, we actually produced a commercial that we released in Europe because it was an animated commercial of the child's phone going in the back pocket that then it would grow into a hand grabbing the child's derriere, because that's what happens today. The kids are gripped by this, and the predators know this. We knew in the early years, MySpace was filled with predators looking for the children. They do it on Facebook, they do it on Twitter, they do it on Xbox, they do it with the games. They will pretend to be peers with these children, and before you know it, they're looking at porn. Now we have the sextortion, where they'll talk the child into giving pictures, and then it's coercion. You need to have conversations with children, and you need to have real conversations with parents who today I find to be offensive Twinkies in terms of their parenting. I have never met such a dumb generation of parents in my life and Western civilization. People are smarter in other parts of the world, and because they understand that the social media is flipping this culture upside down, and people aren't willing to say, no, I don't want this in my house. No, I don't want my child to be influenced by this. But let me get into some of the different faces of human trafficking, because it's not just the sex on the street. It's not just the internet, which is huge contributor to this today, because it allows every pervert that's out there that's been in the basement, the attic, that the family doesn't want to recognize, that goes on the internet, meets another pervert. Each of them validate each other. Then they have clubs, chat rooms, they exchange. They even have what they call live streams. Live streams, there was a case in 1998, Operation Cathedral. It was in California. An 8-year-old little girl spent the night at her 8-year-old friend's house. The father woke up the 8-year-old friend. The mother of that child, after that night sleepover, got a call from some law enforcement people that said, be careful, because that father is under investigation for pedophilia. And that mother realized her daughter had been acting strange since she spent the night at that house. And they did an investigation. And they found out that the father had taken this child in front of a computer with a camera. They call it live streaming. And there's an audience, and he was taking directions from the audience. And I forget how many countries it led into, but I think it's a pretty famous case among law enforcement, but I think it was like 130 countries. That was in 1998, so can you imagine what it is today? And for all you men who look at pornography, heads up, this is a reality. As a television producer, as a photographer, you have no idea what's outside of that lens. So every time you look at pornography, imagine if there's a gun to somebody's head over in the corner that you can't see. Because what we have now is the trajectory of traffickers producing pornography, adult pornography. And 20 years ago, the law enforcement would tell me 75% of the pornography that was on the internet was erotica. The other 25% or 20% was the bestiality and the S&M and the really raunchy stuff, the snuff films. What your children are seeing today, when the average age of looking at porn in the United States is 8 years of age. 8 years of age. And stop gulping. Just accept this. They know it's true. 8 years of age. But should it surprise you when 1 out of 6 boys under 18 are raped in the United States? 1 out of 5 girls are raped in the United States under 18? Now it's flipped upside down. So you have the erotica, maybe 20%, and everything else is real smut. And what we didn't have 20 years ago were brain studies. Now, we all know theoretically, without being doctors, that the front of your brain, where your discernment develops, can be impacted by visuals. Now, for those of us old enough to remember when Tipper Gore in the 80s was talking about video games and kids and violence and the impact on boys playing video games, how many of you remember that? Enough of you. Okay, enough of you to remember that. So we kind of thought in the press at the time that was like stretched, but now we know that that's not stretched, because now we have brain studies that we know that when kids look at violence, it impacts the development of their discernment. Now, put yourself in the mind of a child looking at pornography. Out of context for a child, they're looking at it and they're thinking violence. So think of what that probably does to a child's brain. Now think of the fact of kids get curious about sex. This is how it invades your space. There are cases, and I've worked in them, and I've actually created healing camps for children who are trafficked and children who are abused. We know that Johnny may be curious about sex. His friend's older brother may be looking at porn. We know that monkey see, monkey do. There are cases where Johnny looks at pornography. He opens child pornography, which is a felony. He doesn't know the difference between a misdemeanor and a felony. There's a knock on the front door because somebody at that computer IP address has downloaded child pornography. And people like Jamie and Christine and their crew come through the front door, and little Johnny's pulled out of the house, and little Johnny goes to a detention center for a year. But here's the kicker that throws everybody upside down. Johnny's acted out on Susie, his kid sister. So you have a household where maybe a 13 or 12-year-old is taken out of the house, and the 8-year-old's a victim. And here's where it even gets weirder for the family. Johnny comes out after a year. The sister doesn't want him back at the house. This is the reality that nobody in Silicon Valley wants you to hear. This is the reality, and people are not talking about it because they're barely surviving this kind of pain. And the schools don't want to talk about it, because what are the schools doing? 15 years ago, Johnny's supposed to be using the internet because his teachers are telling him you have to do your homework and you have to look up the internet. So there might be an essay on traffic stops. Johnny punches in traffic stops. Child trafficking comes up. And that's a conversation that mom and dad don't want to really have. So this is sort of like the reality tonight, that I want you to feel free to ask any questions. You will get answers because we've got people here who are experts. But these are the faces, and I had to come up with the different types of faces of human trafficking so people understand the enormity in terms of the different angles of this. You have sex trafficking, you have labor trafficking, you have sex tourism, you have internet pedocriminality, otherwise known as child pornography in the vernacular. You have organ trafficking, which you saw in this. There is such a thing as skin trafficking that I have investigated. Think of voodoos. Think of voodoo, West Africa and in the Caribbean. Ritual abuse, torture. The two women who are expert on that in the world are from Nova Scotia and called me in 2002. I thought I'd heard enough until I started talking to them. It has been recognized by the UN officially. It has been not recognized by the State Department here in the United States. And it has been recognized by a lot of countries around the world. Think of it, cults. Think of cults. And if you think that's not bad enough, if you don't realize it now, you have all just lived through 3 years of medical trafficking. Medical trafficking. And here's how I know it, because I helped define this for the definition of it 23 years ago. If you take a human being, you coerce, you force, you lie, you defraud for money. Doesn't matter whether it's labor, doesn't matter whether it's organs, doesn't matter whether it's sex, on the street or over the internet. That is considered medical trafficking. And that's my third book that'll be coming out at the end of next year. Because I never thought that I would see this on the scale that I've ever seen in my life. Bill Gates, in 2005, put some money from his foundation behind the legalization of prostitution in India. And I couldn't figure out why he was doing that, because he was focusing on anti-human trafficking at the time. In India, you have 250 Dalits, at the lower caste level. The high-end Hindus in India haven't quite figured out that they might want to just create public toilets for these poor souls so they're not defecating in the streets, but they haven't lifted them up. They don't allow them to be taught English or anything like that. They keep them down. And he was in a country like that. If you get into prostitution and if you legalize prostitution, you're going to have people with numerous children because of the poverty in that country giving up their children for money so they can feed the rest of their kids and their family. And I thought to myself, what's going on here? And I later found out that it was connected to some vaccinations. So you have to remember, what you think you know, you do not know. Now, what do you do with all this information, all right? I'm going to tell you flat out, start with your families. Start with your families. 23 years ago, we talked about computers, in the office, in the bedroom. Then you wanted to put them in the family room. Then you wanted to have the parental controls on it. There are no parental controls. Your kids are smarter than any of you in this room. Okay? Just give it up. Give it up. They watch you, they mimic you, they know how to do, monkey see, they get it all done, and they know how to break the rules. And here's the problem, and I've spoken to kids all over the world. I make their parents and their teachers sit in the back of the room, and I take these 5th and 6th graders, and I put them down, and I sit on the floor with them, and I ask them about, what happens to them on the internet. Because they have rules and regulations. They don't want to break them. They don't want to get in trouble with mommy and daddy. But sometimes they, like we all, broke every rule in the house, right? But the problem is, in today's world, it was the little kids with a stranger, okay? And now it's a stranger who basically is coercing the child, threatening to kill the parents. And people, in fact, the kids believe that because they have no context. They have no context. They have no discernment. They're little kids. They're innocent. So it's important for people to know that if you want to stop this, take care of the kids in your life. Your children, your grandchildren, your godchildren, your nieces, your nephew, your family. Have those tough conversations. There's a fly competing with my hair. Pardon me. But have those conversations with people. And then you have to make certain that if little Johnny and Sally spend the night at somebody's house, know who their parents are. In my generation, my parents knew everybody that I was friends with. They knew the parents. Everybody did. And when we were on the beach and we were misbehaving, didn't matter if that was your kid. You would tell those kids to stop fighting. Nowadays, you can't do that because it's politically incorrect. All right? Be careful about the trans conversations when you think about medical trafficking. And I mean that. There was a trans surgical clinic in 1960s. It was opened up by a guy named Dr. John Money. He was the first generation after Alfred Kinsey. He professed to call his transsexual surgeries successes. Dr. Paul McHugh, who's in his 90s now, came in I think it was 1972, and found out that Money lied about it, and he shut it down. And you have to think about today, how in God's name do we have 300 to 400, depending upon who the source is, 300 to 400 trans surgical clinics in the United States? For those who are entrepreneurs and business leaders and lawyers, you know this already. Nobody opens up a market for 300 to 400 clinics unless you know you have a market to sell to. And the targeting of that is kids. And the truth of the matter is, if you put kids on the puberty blockers before they reach puberty, they will be sterile. And once you get into the sexual cross hormones, and then they decide to have the lower operation, the chances of somebody having an orgasm, whether you're a man or a woman, whichever way you're going, is very slim. So why any parent would agree that this is good when your kid is going to be on prescription drugs for the rest of their life and ill? There was a day when Jane Fonda and I and people in my generation turned around and said, African female sexual mutilation is genital mutilation is unacceptable. Well, it's unacceptable for anybody to mutilate a child. And people need to stand up and realize that. We've become barbaric. Barbaric with experimenting on children medically. We've become barbaric thinking this is normal for mutilation. And I attend these lectures where some of these trans get up and they try to explain to me the difference, that there's a difference between gender and sex. So if a man wants to go from a man to a woman and he has the upper operation, but chooses not to have the lower operation, but he feels like a woman, but he's still having sex with women like he did before when he was a man, I'm sitting there going, well, why bother? Why bother? What's the point? That's a fetish. That's a fetish. Let's just call it what it is. But the problem is we're living in a world where we're commodifying people so that other people get rich. That's what slavery's about, all right? And it doesn't matter whether it's the industrial era or the digital age. When the League of Nations was set up in 1920, they actually had two committees. One was for trafficking, one was for slavery. One was labor, one was sex. They had trafficking in New York in the tenements. J.D. Rockefeller Jr. I think it was 1906 or 1907, was assigned by a judge in New York to sit on a grand jury about trafficking in the tenements. This has been going on for a long time. This is nothing new. The problem is we're not dealing with reality about what's happening. We're having conversations in America about slave reparations. If I hear one more people talking about something that happened 500 years ago, 400 years ago, when they're not talking about what's happening today, they need to be discounted. They need to be discounted. But the first line of defense is everybody in their homes. The second line of defense are the prosecutors and law enforcement outside. When people say defund the police, it's the craziest damn thing I've ever heard, because the numbers keep on going up in terms of abusing children. And I'm not talking about safe on the streets or looting. I'm talking about you're not equipped, the public is not equipped to fight internet trafficking. Only well-trained, seasoned law enforcement, and the volume is going up. I forget the exact figure in 2000, but it was less than 100,000 images, and at NCMEC, which is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, help me on this one, Jamie, it's either 22 million or 25 million this year alone. Now think about that increase. In 20 years, you went from under maybe it was less than 50,000, I think, in 2000. Less than 50,000 what they call child porn, but not child porn, child crime, rape scenes. Those images that were reported to NCMEC on the hotline for less than 50, I think it was like 38,000, something like that. And today it's over, that's annually, and today it's over 22 or 25 million. All right? So if you think we're winning this war, absolutely not. Now here's the problem. Bill Clinton signed the law. I started investigating this in the spring of 2000. Bill Clinton signed the law in October of 2000. Then they set up a State Department Trafficking in Persons office. Then it became, and then Baby Bush came in as president, and then he made the head of the office an ambassador, which was a good thing. But the problem is, by the time of 2005, human trafficking became part of the vernacular, and then it became part of the cottage industry, where you had a lot of charities and non-government organizations set up. And they started panhandling a lot of the churches, and they were telling people the cops aren't doing their jobs, that's why we're rescuing kids. Or the cops, don't have a handle on this, and this is why we're doing this. Or nobody's taking care of these kids. It is very important, if you are a donor, if you are a donor to any of these charities, do your homework. I have investigated not only people who have trafficked in all these different faces, but I have investigated NGOs who are false. They don't tell you the truth about their numbers. I have investigated people who have falsely accused people of trafficking when they're not. So, and I've looked at it from an institutional side, but it's very important for anybody who gives money to take the responsibility that you are giving money to people who actually do what they say that they are doing. And you also have to support your police, because if you don't, once those kids go out that door, you've lost your first line of defense in the public arena. You need to rely on the cops about the internet side inside your house and on your kid's phone, but you also have to support the police. Because the people that I have met in this arena, and I've said this for decades, these people are heroes. I don't know how they can possibly spend their days, especially if they're on the internet side of this, seeing what they're seeing, when I only saw it for one day in 2000 and it changed my life. And there are a lot of people, law enforcement, who have to be cycled out and they have to be in therapy to survive this. But it's you know, you don't want to see this, but you don't want your children and grandchildren to ever go through this, because it will forever change their life. When I started investigating the Catholic Church, I decided to take on my heritage because I kept on hearing about things in the Catholic Church in 2000 when I did my first investigation in Europe. I'm originally from Boston. It was fortuitous when Boston imploded, and then, you know, we got to Chicago eventually, we got to LA, we got to Paris, we got to Rome. But coming from a Catholic family, I understood some of the rules of the game. And I met with the prosecutors in Boston, and I said to them when they were trying to negotiate with cardinal law, my dad, my late father, asked me if I'd meet with them, and I said, okay, fine. I met with them, and because he said, Christine, you know more than the prosecutors. So I met with them, and I said, look, stop negotiating with these guys. Go in there, you've got search warrants. Go in there and seize, under canon law, what they call the historical secret archives, because these are the records. You may be prohibited because of statute of limitations, but it'll give you a roadmap where this is going. And but for Judge Constance Sweeney, they were released in the public interest. And I share that with you to let you know that there is hope out there when people want to nail some of the bad guys and the people that want to cover up. But the public has to support the prosecutors and the law enforcement that are involved. It's very, very important, because if you don't have them, and some of them are constrained, all right? It's not just politics. Some of them are constrained because of budgets. Somebody on top doesn't like somebody because of a job, but you've got to support law enforcement. You must. Now, I want to do something now. I want to open this up for questions, but I want to bring up these two prosecutors. So please join me in welcoming Jamie and Christine up here for this. Bring those chairs. Let's bring the chairs up.
You could go around that way. I'll have this.
Now, this is the way we rock at these events that I speak at. Ask the questions. Do not be embarrassed. Do not assume that everybody in this room, you know, understands what I just talked about. Our job is to educate you. Larry?
Wait, Larry, just 1 second. Let's get him.
I think the most important thing, Jamie, is to talk about, everyone says Kane County. Christine, you and I talk about the bubble we're living in. It is the Disneyland. It doesn't happen in King County. What do you know, Jamie?
Well, first of all, having me come here to speak after Christine is awfully cruel, because wow. But I do want to burst the bubble in King County, because we seem to be an affluent community where there aren't things going on. And what I want to tell you is 2 initiatives that we've done in King County, and then I want to stop talking and actually turn it over to the brilliant person standing to my right over here. So when I was lucky enough to be elected, I wanted 2 people by my side. One of those was my criminal division chief, Bob Dorr, who is a career prosecutor. He went from DuPage County to Kendall County, and his specialty was prosecuting child pornography cases. And I agree with the terminology, but Illinois hasn't changed how we phrase that. And so he had retired, and he was doing a cushy job working with his wife, writing up wills and trusts and all kinds of things. And I convinced him to get less money and come right back into the trenches with us. So then I fought with our county board, and they finally approved for us to have 2 Kane County State's Attorney investigators, a prosecutor, and a forensic analyst to be in-house to run these cases. Because what you may not know is Aurora and Elgin absolutely have the resources to run these cases down, because they are hours upon hours, days upon days to be able to do this. These are grand jury subpoenas, linking IP addresses, trying to figure out where the technology is, and then executing search warrants to get that information. What we had to do before is we had to send all of our information out to the Attorney General's office, wait for them to review it, and then we could do something. In the meantime, what's happening? People are still peddling all of this information. So now we do that in-house, and we do that for all of our community in Kane County, especially our smaller ones which do not have the resources to do it. So they run down these knick-knack tips, which means Yahoo sees that somebody is passing child pornography, they turn it over, it gets sent to law enforcement. We are running that down now in Kane County. We have arrested more people last year and this year than we have in the last 5 years for possession, dissemination, and manufacturing of child pornography.
And tell them the ages. You have to understand the ages and infants, toddlers, 3-year-olds. This is serious bone evil. And if you don't think it doesn't have an impact on society, I don't know what planet you're on. Because it's become normal. Yes, sir.
Here, wait a second.
So the idea...
Hold on.
Wait.
I remember once hearing the idea that, I don't know, something like 20 out of 27 men on death row were also addicts, sex addicts. Now,
Victims. That's why when pedophiles go to jail, the chance of them surviving is very low.
so that said, Christine, how do you see the psychology changing? An addict is an addict, and there's...
I'll tell you what I'm going to tell you right now, and I've said this all over the world. If we don't get a grip on this, your children and your grandchildren are pedophiles, ladies and gentlemen. It is that serious, and I know shrinks in different countries that agree with me on that said it before I ever said it. This is that serious. Your children... And here's something that we know from college campuses in the last 15 years. So when the guys are looking at porn, and remember I told you it flipped, like the erotica is less of the percentage, and now it's more the bestiality and the violence and stuff like that, and the gang rapes. Here's what happens. So, you know, and we've all been kids, we've all been curious about sex, okay? We're all adults in this room. You're looking at that, and you think that that's normal. So you're with your girlfriend and you're a young man, and your expectations is a little bit different than hers, because you're thinking it's porn. This porn sex is really what she wants. So how did we find out that this was going on? College counselors, because the girls felt so uncomfortable. They don't want to be bitch slapped. They don't want to be raped. This is not normal. And all of a sudden, because everybody's afraid to have these conversations, because it's uncomfortable for the adults, a younger generation thinks this is normal. Barbaric sex is not normal. Raping a child is not normal. So when you have people that are out there who are validating each other on the internet, those are maggots. They're not normal. It's just not normal.
So I do want to put it over to Christine because Christine is she's the first assistant. So when I'm on vacation, she's it. And she does a great job. But the reason why I wanted Christine as my first assistant is her work in human trafficking and being a 26-year veteran prosecutor. When we got Illinois' trafficking statute, she's the one who was prosecuting those cases. She prosecuted person after person after person, securing convictions and making great case law. So when I tell you that in Kane County we have the expert, I'm not joking about this. She is the expert. And so I'd like to turn it over to her. She's going to talk a little bit about the St. Charles investigation that happened. Just remember, ethically, due to pretrial publicity, there's not a lot of information that we can give, but she's going to talk about how this all started from one person seeing something and saying something, which caused an investigation, and an investigation that was done the right way by police, focusing on the traffickers and not on the people who were the sex workers.
And Christine belongs in a group that she's a hero. I want you to know. These are not easy cases for prosecutors.
And I know we're talking about it as St. Charles because it was St. Charles who got kind of the first information and did that. But I just want to, and go back to Larry's question there about the scope in Kane County. You have to understand there were four places in Kane County that we went and rescued people from that day. So it's not just St. Charles. There's one in Aurora, one in Elgin, one in South Elgin. We also know of two other places that were in Cook County, and they're doing operations. I mean, we got the women out of those places also. Just because of jurisdiction in the law, they aren't part of my case. They're part of the Cook County case. But when we're talking about Kane County, I mean, 4 different locations in our county. And why is that? Because they were meeting, they're the supply, there's a demand here. And when you think about that and some of the things that came out, and once again, can't go into everything, but some of the things that we talked about, some of these women were talking about the number of people that they had to service a day, 25 to 30. That demand is here in Kane County. The people who are doing that, if we don't have, as I call them, the users of this industry, then we wouldn't have this many people. We wouldn't have this many operations just happening here. And it was, as State's Attorney Mosser just said, it's because one person noticed something that was a little unusual in an apartment building that wasn't too far from the police department in St. Charles, and noticed something, and that triggered the investigation that went on. Some of the things that did come out, I know from that, is just to say that women, at least, well, there were 1 to 2 women who were brought into each of these 4, and I'm going to say 6 locations, there's probably 7, but locations a week. 2 women would come in every week. Well, they rotate them because, as we learned from some of our victims that we rescued, they don't live here. Some have permanent places in, like their residence, Florida, Houston, New York. They're told where they're going to go each week. They get flown in, and at their expense, they have to pay for the ticket, and then they have to pay to be transported by the people in the organization. They pay them to go to the place, and they have to give all of their money, and at the end of the week, before they go again to a different location, they'll get paid if they haven't damaged the place, and if they haven't paid for the cleaning thing, like a regular security deposit, but it's for the week. And we learned through some of the records of the St. Charles place, at least, we don't know exactly how long it had been going on, but it had been leased by one of the people that we had have arrested. It's in jail right now. He leased it back in September of 2021. So you guys do the math of how many people went through there before someone came forward in February of this year. So.
Wait, here. Here, just one second.
The comment that I have is just to kind of get an idea of the time span, how long this has been going on. I was on this, discovered this little gem in Mason City, Iowa by going to an old steam train because we thought, oh, this is kind of cool with my kids. And right next to the steam train was this placard where it said orphan trains. And I said, orphan trains? What the heck's an orphan train? And it said on this placard that from the years like 1870 or 80 to the early 1900s, they shipped over 250,000 orphans from the East Coast to the Midwest. And I said, where the heck are all these orphans coming from? And that started my investigation of how long this has really been going on, because that was child trafficking in the late 1800s.
But let me go back up for you. There's a book that's out. Matter of fact, I'm reading it right now, and it has to do with the Davenport orphans.
Yeah.
And that has Davenport, Iowa, and that has to do. It's related to the a lot of eugenics. Sounds familiar, doesn't it, in terms of how we're commodifying people? But the eugenics movement talked about intellectual, whether it be by nature or nurture, and they did some experiments in Iowa at that time that go back to the early 1900s and even after World War II. So it's not just the 1800s. Now, what's your question?
Okay. My question is I'm from Elburn, and there was just recently in my old chiropractic office, funny enough, there was somebody that was arrested for that, and I was assuming that hopefully that's part of this ring that we're starting to investigate.
So it is not. That is completely separate. And so we are actively looking into that because unfortunately the only person that was arrested was the sex worker. Now the people who were renting that were told that they had to get these things done to come back, and they never did because we were going to make sure there was a sting to watch this to do that. So the problem is we are of the potential belief that the traffickers got away. But we're working with the individual who was arrested, and that's why it's really important for for all police officers, much like St. Charles, to treat this the way it should be, looking at it as an investigation. Yes, but they're all gone. And so we don't know that those are real names. They'd been watching it, so they'd been looking at, but multiple people came through there, multiple different license plates, different women were identified there as well. And so that had nothing to do with this investigation to our knowledge. That's a whole separate one.
Jamie, can I ask one question and I'll shut up? You and I met, and you were telling me that there's some software out there that you have that you told me specifically it's riveting, fascinating, repulsive at the same time with VRBO, because I don't think anyone has an idea that what's going on here.
So this isn't actually mine. This is something that the federal government put out. So there's a website, and I can share this so you can share with everybody, where when you are at a VRBO or a hotel, you take a picture and you put it up to this website. Because then law enforcement uses that to look and see where a victim is seen. So if it has similar artwork, the bed, the carpeting, whatever it is, and then they can pinpoint where people are being trafficked. So then they'll know where to go. So they'll find this VRBO because you stayed there and you posted a picture and they saw a picture of a young girl in known child pornography. They can go there and identify it. I wish I was smart enough to invent that, but that definitely was not me.
Yeah, and that this is when, remember I told you about the dead Duchess collection. So fast forward to about 2006-07. Around that time period, there was the volume really started to increase. But they would see maybe pictures of different children, but there'd be like, I don't know, a plaid rug on the bed or something like that. If they got the location, and that's why they started comparing the backgrounds of not just the victims' faces to see if the victims were taken to different places, but also the background so they could cross-reference to at least get the location. Sir, you way in the back. You had your hand up.
Oh, shoot.
Okay.
Christine, you talked about the transgender people that were abused.
Well, transvestites are not transgender. Not necessarily all the time. They're not. That some of them haven't had the operations.
Okay, look, here's the question for the state's attorneys.
Yeah.
We're fighting in the school districts against the Pride movement and this transgender transitioning
Take
to
the
the
mic.
kids of worship.
Take the mic.
All right. Why aren't the state's attorneys doing anything about what's going on in the school districts across the state and the country? Hold on a second. Wait a minute. Governor Pritzker, he passed all these laws sexualizing the children, which is immoral, but yet you're fighting a fight, and it's countering to what your job is supposed to be doing. So as a state's attorney, both of you, why can't we fight the laws that are allowing the children in the schools to absorb all this stuff? Because all you're doing is producing what Christine is exactly talking about.
All right, so let me tell you the politics of it if you guys haven't realized this now. This is the word transgender. I'll just give you some political history here since I've been covering politics for 40 plus years. First time that any president in the United States ever used the word transgender in a State of the Union speech was in 2015. Obama did. And when Obama decided that, and you have to keep in mind that during the Clinton administration, human rights became part of our foreign policy. Bill Clinton established a office at the State Department at that time. It was run by a guy named John Shattuck who had gone to Yale, and it was really to have our human rights out there. So think of Kosovo, the bombing and everything that, a lot of people don't know that a large part of the Balkan crisis had to do with the natural resources, the Albanian, Moldova, whatever it is, the Albanian, Macedonia, Bulgarian pipeline. I forget the name of who. 3 countries' names are on it. Having said that, that was during the Clinton administration. Then the Obama administration decided that transgender was there, and they wanted to do something about it. And Obama appointed an LGBT czar in his administration at the State Department. Between the time that was announced and filled, he added the I. I literally, as a journalist, had to say something. What's the I stand for? I had absolutely no idea, all right? So that became part of our foreign policy. Under the Biden administration, Biden in June of 2022, through executive orders, and that's why you have on this particular climate right now, you have a lot of what would be federal issues or local issues being taken over by the federal government. President Biden, through an executive order in June, I think it's June 22nd, 2022, through the entire federal government behind LGBTIQ+. The plus stands for, and I'm going to say this because this is another thing that I forgot to share. Have you ever heard of minor attracted persons? Okay, so about 2010, a friend of mine actually attended a minor attracted persons conference, and she told me that where they're going with this is they're going to decriminalize pedophilia. So I said, well, it's hard to envision that, but she was pretty good. In the spring of 2019, I found out that they invited therapists to this because they wanted the therapists come in as advocates for them to decriminalize it. I called a friend of mine who was head of an Eastern Shore of Maryland Mental Health Association, and I said, sign us up, use my real name. We attended it. I spent all day. I turned to some people in your line of work, and I said, find me somebody who has infiltrated North American Men-Boy Love Association. They introduced me to Bob Hamer, who is a renowned retired undercover agent for the FBI, who coached me and my colleague when we attended that all-day event. And if you think that the decriminalization of pedophilia is not part of the plus in the LGBTI plus, I can guarantee you that it is. I can guarantee you that it is. And what they're doing is that they're using therapists as their advocates. They presented to us the German model. See, here in the United States, if I say I'm attracted to kids or I've slept with a kid or raped a kid, they have to report it to law enforcement. In Germany, the model is that they don't have to. And the presentation of the people there, they said, we don't harm kids. But, there was a couple of guys there I took copious notes and talked to. And, when I asked him why he spent 10 years in jail and how young was his friend, and he said 8, I got the message real quick. All right? And then we pulled some of the jackets of the history of those cases. But I can tell you the intention is to use therapists to advocate for them, to change the law, to put money in the pocket of the therapist. And I offer this information to you so you understand that when they want to put mental health and drugs and trans into schools, this is a business, ladies and gentlemen. This is a business. Trafficking, human trafficking, sex trafficking, internet trafficking, labor trafficking, organ trafficking, medical trafficking, it is a business. And you've got to stop thinking about this morality, okay? It's a business. But we don't have the laws when you have other people in power that are pushing for the legalization, the normalization of it. That's the problem you have. But you have to wake up because there are people that want to push it.
Wait.
I'm sorry? Oh, no. That is just that is a cop-out question. Why didn't somebody put the Cardinals in jail for the same there's no political will in this. I sat there with the guys who were head of trafficking at the federal level and said, as a Catholic, when are you going to prosecute these guys for trafficking institutionally? Because they were moving them not from parish to parish. They were moving them out of the country. They were putting chains on the kids. They kept the records of everything. Don't just think this is trans. It's because people are unconscious in the public. This isn't on these guys that have these jobs. It is on the public that doesn't understand the game.
We'll go with the question here.
Thank you very much. This is a very, very important topic. When I look around, I suspect that most of the people in this room are affiliated with some church. I'm affiliated with a large church. What are our churches doing about this? Little or nothing. The pastor of Moody Church downtown wrote a pretty thick book called Silence. Why is the church silent on this issue? There's another book with a blue cover, The American Church by Metaxas, raising the same question. Why is the church so silent on this issue? Please go home and ask your pastor, your priest, and get them involved in this issue. As you point out, this is critical, and the churches ought to be speaking up on this. And get Metaxas' book.
We did put out there that we invited any pastor to come here for free to join us. So we tried.
Thank you.
I was in a church on Sunday in Nashville, and it's 4,000 or 5,000 seats. It was completely packed, and the pastor stood up and he talked about, if you believe in the teachings of Jesus, you should be a soldier of Christ, and you should not have fear in your vocabulary.
Right. Amen.
Yeah.
I'll be over there. Just 1 second. I'll be over there.
My question is to you, Christine. We have 9 grandchildren, and at what age should their parents start talking to their children about the dangers of what's the sex trafficking without taking away their innocence?
Well, I looked at about 15, 16 books in Greenwich, Connecticut Public Library about a month ago when I went to this lecture that a trans was giving. And I looked at the it's cartoon pornography is what it is. Okay? That's what everybody thinks is a good thing for kids, all right? I came from a very innocent background, and I just have to say, I don't think they should talk about it. And when I talk to children, I talk about that you can go to mommy and daddy if you break a rule. You always can trust them. You can trust your teachers. You know, if the teacher's trustworthy. I don't know about that anymore, but that's what I used to say, all right? But I think it's keeping the communication open with the parents for the curious questions, because Susie might have a friend, Sally, who knows a little bit more. That's why I'm saying you have to know that the parents. I don't think you should ever explain to a child anal, vaginal, oral sex. I'm sorry. It's inappropriate. And I think they are doing it in schools, but you know what? Pull your kid out of school or don't let them go to the library.
So I want to say one thing that we tell kids when we go to schools. Teach your kids what the parts actually are. So for a girl, tell them that it is a vagina. We have had cases where somebody said they taught their kid that the vagina is a cupcake. And so the kid went to school and said, Grandpa's been licking my cupcake. Thankfully, that teacher understood what was going on and reported it, but we've seen that happen when they've said it. The way that I do this with my own children, because I'm a mother of 3, and I have read more police reports than I can ever imagine, and the fact that I haven't had any wine during this whole presentation is...
You will after.
I will, 100%. I taught my kids what the parts were, and then I also told them about nobody should touch you. When we brought them to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician would check them, I said in front of them, okay, the only reason why this is allowed is because I'm here. The pediatrician followed up and said, absolutely, nobody should be touching these parts. That's how we need to educate our children, and we need to make sure that they understand to come to us. Because part of it is also normalization. Well, when Grandpa's touching me, Grandpa's supposed to love me, Grandpa's supposed to protect me, is this the right thing to do? And then when Grandpa says, don't tell anybody about this, or I'll get in trouble, it scares them. You need to foster that environment with your children, that nothing that they say when it comes to that would ever be wrong, and that you will stand up for them. Because Christine, having prosecuted way more of these cases, can tell you that sometimes a parent delayed bringing it in because they didn't want to believe the child.
Stand up. To the gentleman that brought up the question of talking to your pastor, talking to your church, I don't know if that was rhetorical or not. It depends on your pastor and your church. But there are churches that are covering things up, and that is a reality. Jamie, were you on the Paxton Singer case? Was that you?
No.
Okay. So I just don't care. I'm fearless. I don't care. I am a warrior for Christ, and my heart is for children. When I say I don't care, I don't mean I'm leaving a legacy.
What's your question?
I'm leaving a legacy.
What's your question?
The question is, when it gets to a level of where there is an institution, whether it's church or it's school or school district, that is...
What's your question?
The question is, when there are cover-ups happening, how do you pursue uncovering and it not just getting like teachers that are still on staff who were removed because they were taking pictures of students? And you confront or you have conversation with administrators and principals and pastors, and you get the runaround or you get a cover-up or you get the narrative of like, you're being divisive. Thank you.
So it's a good question, and it has happened, and it has happened here in Kane County. So in addition to prosecuting the people who are offending on the children, we also prosecute the people who do not report the abuse. Everybody who works in the school districts and in the churches are mandated reporters. We at the State's Attorney's Office have taken a proactive approach of going out and training, both offering it to churches and offering it to schools and going through the Regional Office of Education and reminding them that we will prosecute you. We go with our law enforcement officers who are our best partners in all of it, and the officers say, okay, teachers, you have to report this, but you should also be reporting it to us so we can fully investigate it. Because we don't stop at the perpetrator. And most of the time when we find out they've perpetrated on somebody, after we charge them, more people come forward. And then we continue to prosecute. So we are very aggressive in the protection of our children.
Say something, because it was something that Jamie said that I just want to say this. One of the patterns that I heard when I did a lot of these investigations and talked to victims, I mean, I can't even, I've lost count, okay, how many people I've talked to around the world who were victims and in some of the similar same situations. But one thing that I found in the Catholic Church as an institution, that was a pattern repeated over and over and over again. Do not tell mommy and daddy. So in the last 3 years, 2.5 years, when I have heard in schools that people are saying, Johnny wants to come in and put on a pink dress on Tuesdays and he's not supposed to tell mommy or daddy. I've talked to parents whose daughters are Michaela and the teachers are calling them Billy, and the mother finds out and says, no, my daughter's confused. My daughter's just confused. My daughter is not Billy. And the school boards don't want to hear about that, and you're not supposed to tell the parents. Anytime anybody ever tells a child, do not tell mommy and daddy, that person should be fired. That is what predators tell kids, all right? It's not a crime, but that's what predators tell children. Do not tell mommy and daddy. You can't tell anybody else. Or, send me the nude pictures over the internet, or I'm going to kill your parents. I mean, when a 6-year-old told me in Australia, and he was brought to tears about how he was threatened because it wasn't even nude pictures, okay? But he was threatened, and he really believed that these people were going to go after his mummy, his single mummy. We got that guy arrested, okay? That was just a 6-year-old. So, I mean, just know that, but if it gets to be too much, you might just have to take your kids out of school, and the grandparents might just have to step up to the plate and help them.
So many children are coming over with single people over the borders with the illegals, and single men with children, and the Biden administration denied the instant DNA testing that would take 45 minutes to prove whether the child was related to them. So as the prosecutors, or Christine, you may know as well, are we gearing up for this giant number of kids coming over here to be, slaves? I mean, because that's more than likely that is what's happening.
Okay, so let's talk about migrations. I can honestly God say that our foreign policy has increased human trafficking all over the world in the last 23 years. And I'm going to tell you how. We haven't taken, the guys that are in Silicon Valley about the internet, we haven't done anything that should have been done a long time ago. There was, during Arab Spring, Arab Rising, however you guys refer to it, 2010, 2011, I can tell you that I personally investigated that, and that the increase of transnational, transcriminal, human trafficking, weapons and drugs, and that in fact during the during the Obama administration when Hillary, and this is, I'm not saying this as a political statement, I'm giving you facts that I've reported on, all right? But during the Obama administration, when Hillary was Secretary of State and Leon Panetta was head of CIA with Obama's blessing, we actually spent USAID money in training what Hillary called civil societies to uphold, on social media, to uphold their governments. In fact, there were civil dissidents to train them on social media to overthrow the despots that we so wanted to overthrow at the time, from Tunisia to Egypt to Gaddafi, etc. When you see what's going on at the border, I've investigated this back during the Obama administration, 2013, 14, around there. It was very much staged. There is such a thing of going from smuggling to trafficking. When you see it increasing by the numbers that I've never seen in the last 15 years, yes, at least, Michelle, estimates are that 85,000 children have gone missing, unaccompanied children. I would say that that's probably 4 times that, okay, that's unaccounted for, and that many of these kids will get caught in there because they're not going to get hooked up, because we have smugglers, we have organizations, we have cartels, it's taking it over. It's the Wild West, and some of these charities get a lot of money, but they place them in foster care, and then that's another nightmare for you guys, okay? These guys know about the foster care nightmare, all right? So it's not perfect, but when you put kids out there on the streets by themselves, yeah. I mean, the beast ride alone in Mexico coming up from Guatemala border. That's a disaster, but that's nothing new. The problem is that this should be shut down. These people should not be put at risk. We should not have it organized, but it's not just the cartels, it's also the traffickers, it's the governments involved. There was a guy during the Obama administration who was an employee of the State Department in Guatemala who was pushing this advertising. Telemundo was out there saying, come to America, come to America. There are ads out there with the cartels all over the internet right now. So yeah, this happens because people are unconscious. Unconscious.
So what are we going to do about it in Kane County since we're all here? Well, we've already applied for funding for human trafficking so that we can have an internal unit. That unit will have dedicated prosecutors, investigators, the forensic portion, advocacy, and translation services, along with being able to get them to resources. So if we're not able to get the funding from the grant that we're applying from, I'm going to the Kane County Board. And I'm going to let you know when I'm going to the Kane County Board, because I know you will all be there. And that's what we're going to do here, because we are not oblivious to this.
So I want to ask each of you, because I'd like for you to share this, because I think I know the answer, but I think it'd be good for the audience. How tough is it personally for you guys covering these cases?
I'll let you start.
Oh, I don't want to get too personal. So I started at the Child Advocacy Center in 2004. So, and that's where we would prosecute people who would sexually assault or abuse children. We were doing the child pornography back then. Also, it's in a different unit. I think my first child pornography case I actually prosecuted, though, was even before I got there. Probably in 2002, I had a live victim, as we like to say that, not just the crime scene, but I had the person have to come in and testify. Laws were a lot different back then in 2002 about how we could even prosecute them. As Christine was saying, just seeing some of these images, and I prosecuted a number of child pornography cases. It's you don't get rid of them in your head, and yes, it does take a toll on us, and so then that's why you have to have other outlets, right? We're talking all about stress outlets or everything. I mean, I have my own things that I do, but I'm not going to lie, it took a toll even on my marriage, because you can't read about all this stuff that's going on and think that you can go home and have a normal life. My kids are all those kind of people who are kind of like, my mom's strict. Yeah, I wouldn't let my kids go down to the park because I couldn't see it from my kitchen window. I couldn't see it from there, so I would always go with them. Mom, everyone else can go by themselves. Yeah, well, I'm sorry. I know too much. My husband would always remind me, though. He said, you do realize you see a very small percentage of, all of King County. And I went, yeah, I know, but I know they're out there. And if anything ever happened, that's on me, right? Then that's on me. So I'm not going to lie that it doesn't take a toll. It does. You have to have other outlets. I mean, there's other things. I will say I'm a very active member of my church community. I'm in bell choir. Love it. It takes my mind away from everything. So, because it's really hard to do. And so you have to concentrate on something else, but you have to have that. But it takes a toll.
So this will be the third time I've mentioned wine in this presentation. So to me, it has. It's taken a toll on my marriage, my children. I mean, when I go to certain things and I learn something new about technology, I make a beeline towards my children, and I'm like, okay, I'm looking at your laptops from school. I want to see everything. But as much as it's hard and stressful, I would never want to be anywhere else but here. I love to be a voice for those who have had their voice taken away, and I would sacrifice almost everything, not my children or my husband, but I would sacrifice all of what I could have done, including making way more money than this, to do this. I love it.
So when I say that law enforcement, the prosecutors, the cops on the street, the cybercrime cops taught me, I'm honored to have you guys here today because seriously, these are your community people who are heroes. And sir, to you in the back, why don't they do something about it? They can only do as much as they possibly can, but if you want them to do more, then it's going to take the public speaking up, standing out, not giving a damn about being rejected or being politically correct. It's like being real and fight it and get the pastors involved and speak up. I mean, that's the only way to do it. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
We have one more person here first. I think it's getting, okay.
Say something in the back. Let him say it.
In response, I'll go back to the drag shows, performing in front of kids. We've been protesting, we fought against that. And that's where the state's attorney said there's nothing they can do about it, law enforcement doesn't want to do it, it's not fun. If I bring my kid to a strip club, I get arrested. That's the problem, you know, this might be off topic, but what you're talking about, Christine, you do a great job. It's not personally against the state attorney, it's against the law in general. As parents, adults, we're trying to fight against this stuff, but when we stand up and say, you can't be doing that in front of kids, where's our backup?
And
That's what I'm trying to say.
I understand.
You can't play by the rules.
Right.
Because they're not playing by the rules.
And what you mentioned earlier is the definition of obscenity. And I don't know if any of you have ever done a deep dive into our criminal statutes, but we really have not amended our criminal statutes in any way that match what our real life is right now. And we have still the crime of electronic communication, which doesn't actually deal with the harassing way in which people have tortured others over the internet or over social media. And so we do fight every single day. We are not as proactive as we would like to be because unfortunately a state's attorney's office is reactive. As in a crime occurs, it's investigated and it comes to us. What Christine is saying is we could do so much more when we have the staff, when we have the funding, when I even have the ability to hire a prosecutor, because right now my starting prosecutor is at $62,000 and they have over $100,000 in debt. They have to wear suits to go to court. We pay for them to get their license and their education, but that doesn't mean that they can then pay their rent. They can buy a house, they can buy a car, they can have a family. I am barely making ends meet at the state's attorney's office because I cannot pay any of my people, from my support staff to my attorneys, what they deserve to do so that they stay. I lose more people to private practice because they can actually afford to live. And so what Christine is saying is still be vocal, but also support us and police officers because they are struggling with the exact same thing that we're struggling with. And without law enforcement, and I will fight anybody who says defund the police, because we need them.
We have, just so you know, we have one more question, and then we have Michelle Peterson.
Hi, thanks for everybody being here on the panel up there. And the one thing I wanted to know is that I know there are a lot of wonderful grandparents here, and parents also, but of young children. I would like to know what some of the things are, Christine, that you would look for that would signify like a signal that something is wrong in your child's life.
I mean, we can all add to that one. I mean, it's you know, your kids' grades drop, your kid's effervescent, and all of a sudden becomes very shy. Doesn't want to say that something happened, goes silent. You know, you ask a child, "Is something going on with you?" No. I'm one of these people who I got to talk about this. I got to talk about the fact that we're a pharmaceutically addicted country, the most pharmaceutical country in the world. Because I think part of the problem that we're doing to the kids is a great disservice. We're telling them they're all mentally crazy. Well, you know what? So am I, okay? And I've been that way my entire life. But I think that there's certain things we have to accept as fact. We are the most pharmaceutically addicted country in the world, okay? And when I say addicted, use. 75% of Americans, or a little bit more than that, take pharmaceuticals of some sort. We're the first country in the world. I was there when I was political director at CNN in the 80s when they put the first commercials, okay? And they say, oh, you can have a stroke, you can die, but take it anyways, all right? Jesus, I mean, when you think about what we're inundated with, okay, you know, and that's like when they said, you know, take mRNA vaccinations and they're safe and effective, and I'm talking to the people that are in the Frankenstein business or going to the bat caves to bring the specimens to the labs to mix them with humanized mice so that they can create a coronavirus pandemic, so they can create vaccinations that don't work, that are not safe and effective because they broke every standard and protocol, you know, known to man with the FDA and around the world. So we have to, when we talk about kids and what to look at, Sue, we have to be careful that we don't over-medicate kids.
You can't vaccinate them to begin with, then, because you can't poison them to make them healthier and then poison them again.
Look at, we're gonna bring to Chicago. I haven't figured out when this is gonna happen. We're gonna bring a bus here to Chicago that's vax versus unvaccinated kids, okay? But in the meantime, you know, be careful that if you give kids medications for whatever reasons, all right? And I don't believe SSRIs. We know, and I will tell you this. We're about to release this. We know that the FDA, just like they kept they want to keep Pfizer files with COVID vax shots under seal for 75 years. We have the documentation now from the FDA from 2004 to 2014. They have known all along that the psychotropic drugs, do you know what psychotropic means? Yeah. This is SSRI, this is SRIs, Ritalin, all that kind of stuff. The kids get, they too animated, so they put them on drugs. We know that the FDA and the pharma now, that we have the documents, 2004 to 2014. They know about the suicides, the violence, and the murders and assassinations, the mass shootings. They have known about the links to that, yet we push that on our kids today. So when you ask about what to look for, Sue, it's different because we're medicating the kids, okay? So pre not medicating kids, it would be the behavior. Now we suppress the natural behavior because we over-medicate the kids. So I'm not certain exactly, I can probably ask these to Jamie and Christine, you know, what's showing up in your cases? That would be the best question I could ask you.
So talking a little bit about what a kid presents with. Sometimes it's even physical changes, like they stop showering, they gain weight, they stop eating. There are so many signs that we see. They're not your kid. And I'm not just talking about the kid who doesn't want to talk to you, because my 14-year-old boy really doesn't want to talk to me when I ask him questions. It's that withdrawn nature. When you see something, just ask questions, because there's something that's going on. In our cases, we are seeing a significant amount of drugs, and in our schools, we are seeing a significant amount of drugs being passed on. And it is a lot of these medications like Ritalin, ADHD medicines, things like that, because they're giving them to each other because they're readily accessible. They're easy to get. Even cannabis is significantly easy. And it's, again, after some of these presentations, I go home and I'm like, why don't I have my kids home with me at all times so I could stare at them and make sure they're okay? But again, that goes to education. I talk to my kids about it. I educate them. I don't terrify them. I educate them. And they also know that they can come to their mom or dad at any time.
Michelle would like to speak for 1 second. She will be the person that will be managing a committee on human trafficking here in Kane County.
Hi, so if you guys are wondering what your kids will manifest as, they will have a resting heart rate of 120. Right? They don't want to go to school. They withdraw from their friends. They shut down on their parents. And the reason I know this is because it happened to my son. Fortunately, I caught it before the teacher did anything to him. He offered him $500 and then $1,000 and then $1,500 for oral sex. So listening to Christine say how they would take these kids and some man is going to put their dick in their mouth. I could hardly contain myself over there thinking that that's what could have happened to my son. Had I not stood up and pushed back, I get seen as being a bulldog sometimes. But you haven't walked in my shoes. And if I hadn't stood up, we would not have a grooming conviction in the United States. We have the very first and still to date only grooming conviction in the United States. So I'm sure that you guys have probably used that in your cases. My son is AK in those notes. They don't use their name because he was a minor at the time. I found out this last January through a sex trafficking investigator that they use our case for every trafficking case that they convict, because they prove the grooming to then prove the trafficking. And I'm telling you what, I have never been more convicted that God's hand has been all over this from the very beginning. It took us 3 years to get this guy convicted. From 2010 to 2013, my son would have never told me what was going on, not in a million years, because he wanted it to just go away. When he knew that I found out, he thought it would just stop. And somebody asked me last week, a couple weeks ago, so what did you feel when you sat there and thought about like your anger with God when this was put on you? That never once crossed my mind. Not once. I told my son this was put in our laps for a reason, because we have to take care of it. Because what about the next kid? And the kid after that? What about the 3 boys across the street and the 4 down the street? How do you face their parents knowing that you could have made a difference if something happens to them? I had to have talks about suicide with my son, not only for him, but if the teacher committed suicide that wasn't on him, sent him to counseling. My son is very smart, told the counselor everything he wanted to hear so he'd get out of there. I asked the counselor, what are you doing? He's like, he's fine. I'm like, he's not fine. He's not fine. And he still was not fine until 2 years ago at 28 years old. Then he was finally fine. And it still haunts him. And even now, he is just finally where he can talk about this and try to stop other kids from having this happen to them. I took my son's phone from him all the time. I would look at the text messages, the apps, the websites he was going to. I got mad at him because he was cussing with one of his friends. I'm like, what if their mom picks up that phone? What are they going to think about you? Here we go. I never saw one of over 6,000 text messages between May I never saw one text message between May and October, because when he'd get them in, he'd delete it. He'd read it and delete it. There were messages that came in overnight. If I can tell you one thing, take your kid's phone at night. They don't need it. If I would have taken his phone before he went to bed, I would have seen those messages coming in. Keep them off the internet as much as you can. Those gaming systems they're playing with other people across the country and across the world. They're telling them things that they shouldn't be telling them. Protect your children and fight for them. So the other thing I wanted to say is we are actually working on a bill. So I think there was some misunderstanding. There is a grooming law in Illinois. It became a law in 2013, right before we went to trial. This guy was going to take a plea deal. He wouldn't have had to register as a sex offender. He wouldn't have had to, he would still be teaching. Okay? Because he was going to have to take a plea deal after 2.5 years. We ended up getting a new state's attorney in, and he came after him. And then what happened was the grooming became a law in Illinois in 2013. We go to trial. We get the very first grooming conviction and solicitation of a minor. So what we're trying to do now, and what she's saying is like the laws haven't kept up with what we're doing. Did you know that when somebody is on the sex offender registry list, okay, they can't go within 500 feet of a school, right? They can't go into a public park. They can't go into a state park. They can't go into fairgrounds, things like that.
That's not every state, though.
Here in Illinois.
It's not uniform.
So did you know here in Illinois, though, they could go into a Dave & Buster's. They could go into a Chuck E. Cheese. They can go into the private play areas that are at malls because those are privately owned. That needs to change in our law because those things didn't exist in the 70s when that law was written.
The other thing that we're trying to do, and everyone keeps telling me this can't be done because the way that we do our law here in Illinois is that we're trying to get somebody who is charged with grooming that they wouldn't be able to take a plea deal. Okay? So what happens is the sex trafficking investigator told me, she said they had a 14-year-old girl in Texas, had the guy and his mother locked up on grooming charges. They took a plea deal, they got out, took the girl, they haven't seen her in a year and a half because they trafficked her then. And not only that, the biggest gut punch that I got from the sex trafficking investigator, she said that if they would have gotten their hands on my son, that teacher, that he would have trafficked him, maybe not across the country, but in their own little circle. So just know that this stuff is real, it exists, it's out there, and I'm asking every state's attorney in the state of Illinois if they would get behind this law, and if there's some way they can help us with this law and get it changed so that it's not just a class 4 felony or a class D felony. Make it a class 2 felony. You get a class 2 felony if you traffic marijuana. But you groom a child and it's a class 4 felony. That's a problem. That's a huge problem. We need more money put towards this. I'm just wondering too, like some of this money they put towards some of these, the election stuff that they're doing here in Kane County, what if we use that money to put towards the trafficking and pay some of your attorneys? That way we get good attorneys and keep them. Anyway. So our the teacher, he only had to do 30 days in jail. So it's just the way our law is, right? You get a day for day good behavior, probation. He paid $2,500 in fines. I lost more money than that in just what I lost in work, going to every status hearing and showing up and being present and letting them know that they weren't going to get away with this. I mean, this stuff is unbelievable what happens. He only had to register as a sex offender for 10 years. This is the 10th year. He's not teaching. He can't teach anymore. But this is the reality of all of this. And I'm telling you what, as God is my witness, I am so glad he didn't touch my kid because I don't know that I'd be standing here right now. And I hate to think what could have happened to my son then. But my son is actually working at a military boarding school. And he wants to put into their curriculum at the beginning of the year in their orientation about online safety. He's actually going back to be an attorney. He went on to be a United States Marine, served for 5.5 years. But he spiraled out of control, huge. Drinking was just not good. He was not in a good place. But he came out of the Marine Corps. He speaks Russian and Spanish fluently, very smart. Got his undergrad and wants to go on to law school. And wants to work with parents and kids who've been trafficked or who have been molested. That's what he'd like to do. So the other thing, too, is if you fight for your kids, 79% of those people, of those kids, will become productive members of society. So that's the biggest thing. Believe your children. Fight for them hard. I don't care what people call you. Because I'm telling you what, I was not a very popular person down at our state's attorney's office because that's where I had the biggest fight. Our school was behind us 100%. The state's attorney's office fought us and wanted me to just go away. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'd like to thank our state's attorney and Christine Bayer for all she does in the office. Thank you, Michelle, for sharing your story. And, in your life, you have a chance to make a difference. And Christine has made a difference in her life and for the world. So I ask each of you to go out and make a difference for these kids. As I said in the beginning, this is very personal to me. I just can't stand it. And so I am hoping that this event will help all of us in this room to go out and help save these kids because they need us. Thank you.
And you can do it. Don't ever think you cannot do it. You can in your own way.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. We appreciate Christine for making the difference in this world. And please join us next month, September 14th, for Tom Renz. Thanks again, and God bless our country.